Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Secret Sunday session. Today I'm joined by Sloane Elizabeth. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Of course. Thank you for having me, Ashley. I'm so excited.
And today I'm also very excited to jump on and discuss all things binge eating, food obsession, knowing that you are working in this space and doing amazing things and supporting people through their journey, whatever that may look like. And of course, before we do jump in, I will just mention that this podcast will have a trigger warning. So know that if anyone feels triggered by this content, there is help out there, knowing that we will be discussing things relating to eating disorder related content as well as other food obsessive behaviors. So know that you can always reach out to us here at the Secret Burden or follow Salone and what she is doing, as well as following some of her food freedom programs. But we're going to jump straight into it. So once again, thank you for joining us. But for those people that are not aware of who you are, who is Sloane Elizabeth and what does she do with herself?
Oh, well, I feel like that's a really big question, but I will tell you what I do when it comes to food freedom. So, I am a food freedom coach and I help women heal their relationships with food, whether that is binging, overeating, or restricting, under eating, the guilt, the obsession, all the things. And I help them create not only a normal relationship with food, but really like the best, most intuitive, most healthy, most loving relationship with food that they've ever had. And so I combine science from nutrition, but also like psychology, neuroscience, biology with spirituality. So I'm a Reiki energy healer as well. We talk about the principles of manifestation, inner child healing, higher self activation, intuition, like third eye chakra, intuition activation. If we want to eat intuitively, we got to have an intuition activated and awake and ready. So I combine those two forces together, and I found that that's really the secret sauce to healing your relationship with food so that you can eat with love and intuition.
I love that. It's like a whole body experience with what it should be, honestly, because it is. We're not just one part of ourselves. We have multiple parts that we need to tap into, and that's phenomenal. But why get into this work in the first place?
So I struggled with food starting when I was about 17. And it was very interesting because I saw girls in my high school who clearly had eating disorders. I saw girls bring juice cleanses to school for lunch when we were like 15. Okay, I'm from Los Angeles. So it was available, it was a thing. And I was always like a food lover, confident in my body. I was like, I could never do that. And then when I was 17, I went through like a second puberty. Like my body finally changed. And I just kind of thought when I was 13, 14 that I just got lucky and that nothing was going to happen with my body. But I didn't realize what was happening, right? Because I'm 17. I'm like, why am I gaining weight? Why is my body looking different? What is happening? So this activated my wounding around control, around self-worth, around perfectionism, and I started restricting, and I really thought that I was being healthy, right? So we see this as what is called orthorexia, like the obsession with eating as healthy as possible, as quote clean as possible. And so that went on for a few years. And eventually I realized when I was in school, like university, that I could either keep going this path and really develop like a full-on eating disorder, or I could do something about it and actually heal. So I was a pre-med student. So I got all the science classes, I took nutrition, and it was helpful. It was totally helpful. But knowing the science behind, let's say, fructose and why bananas are not going to make you fat, right? Like knowing that on a factual level is one thing, but feeling totally safe, totally guilt-free, totally okay with going to get an acai bowl with your girlfriends is a very different thing. And it wasn't until I actually dove into spirituality and learned about energy, about law of attraction, about my inner child, about my intuition, that I actually healed. Like that is when it all clicked. And I really did not see anybody else talking about food and healing and intuitive eating through that like energetic spiritual lens. Like I could not find it. Even intuitive eating to me felt like it was still just about food and it wasn't actually about your third eye intuition. And so I realized I was already very entrepreneurial. I'd already started posting like recipes on Instagram. I was like, this is my life's purpose. Like, this is what I'm meant to do. So that's the abridged version of why and how.
I love that. That is so phenomenal. And I really want to tap into, you talking about that third eye and that intuition. So often we ignore it. As kids, we have it. We go and do
Yes.
whatever we want. We're so carefree. And then there reaches a point where that changes. Can you, in your experience, explain to us when you believe that does change and why it might change?
You're so right. We are all born with an intuition, and we see this in animals as well. And I believe that this is why also like kids can create such beautiful bonds with animals. This is why kids have imaginary friends or can more easily communicate with souls that have passed on. Like it's because the veil is very thin and we are naturally connected to our own intuition, to source, universe, God, whatever it is for you. And so I think that it really gets conditioned out of us from the time that we're born, especially if your parents, the people that are raising you, are not promoting your intuition, right? Like parents and school basically. And it's not their fault. It's not their fault at all. It's just society. It's
Yeah.
just how it is. Like we are taught to be very logical. We live in a patriarchal society, which is all about the 24-hour clock instead of like the 28-day cycle, the moon cycle, the seasons. So I think kind of instantly it is conditioned out of us, but it never goes away. I believe that our intuition can be lying dormant, and that means it can be awoken. And that is really my goal for my clients if they feel like they're not in touch at all. And then I have some clients that come to me and are very intuitively aware in other realms of their life, but they never thought to use that depth of intuition with food and health. And so bringing it back to the body and doing de-armoring work around the numbing that we do to our bodies with food is where that intuition can get even brighter and even clearer so that you can use it to make any life decision, including decisions like what am I going to have for dinner.
Mm. And is that really hard for a lot of people? Because I mean, we live in a society that's so busy. We don't have the time. We have then social media creating another noise that is telling us what to eat, when to eat, how to eat. How do we learn to block it all out? Because it is almost unrealistic to learn to just find somewhere, go somewhere solo, and just lock yourself in a box.
Yeah, no, that is so not the goal. The goal is to give you all the tools to really be tapped into your intuition, your body, food with the life that you're already living, assuming the life that you're living is the one that you want to live. I will say I have so many clients join my food program. My main one is called Food Freedom Collective. And not to, I think this can like potentially scare people, but like I've had people move, change jobs, break up, find new partners, like big life things happen because when you activate your intuition with the intention of being intuitive with food, like your intuition is going to help you with everything else in life as well. So it really gets to be a life upgrade. And, I think there's a few things that will help when it comes to being really in integrity with your intuition, despite society maybe not being there. So, one is like being in a community of some sort of like-minded people. So for me, like I typically, for most of my programs, there's a community for that reason. So being able to plug in there, I'm always working with a coach or a community for myself for that reason, whether it's, in-person friends or online and across the world. And then secondly is, okay, so I, often hear women get pretty angry at different points in their healing journey. Like, why is society doing this to me? Or why did my parents do this to me? Or this is so effed up, right? And diet culture and like, I'm angry. And I always recommend that they channel that sacred rage, turn it into a fire that fuels your own inner conviction. So instead of spending your energy being angry that the patriarchy exists, can we take that energy and say, okay, I'm feeling fired up, and I'm going to use that fire to be so freaking convicted in the fact that I am going to maintain integrity with my intuition. So, like, using that tension to almost be leverage to your own self commitment,
Mm.
to being the salmon that swims up the stream when everyone else is swimming downstream. The
Mm.
third thing is boundaries. So I teach physical boundaries, spoken boundaries, but also energetic boundaries, which I think is the one that a lot of people are missing, where, okay, I can't leave the room. You can't go to the mountain alone and lock yourself there, as you said. And maybe it doesn't make sense to write a speech or talk, like, right, communicate boundaries to a stranger. So that's where energetic boundaries can come in, so that you do feel safe and protected and can kind of be in your zone no matter who's around you.
Wow, phenomenal. And with that, how do you know? Because honestly, with, intuition, people just say, oh, it's just a feeling, it's a gut feeling or it's a thought that comes to you. But how do people know that's truly what they want and desire?
So one, there's a few different techniques. The one that I really like is or not embodying, but imagining my higher self. So we all have a highest version of ourselves. I think of her as like the most divine version of me. Like, she is a goddess, like she is divinity. And she is me, I am her. But sometimes creating a little bit of separation and imagining her persona, like, whenever I do deep meditations where I imagine this, I always get a lot of fashion inspiration from her. I'm so serious. Like,
I
I
love
have
that.
bought so many pieces of jewelry and clothing based on the visual of my higher self.
Okay.
It's so divine. Like,
Mm.
I love it. And so I will sometimes, if I'm like not sure, right, what my intuition is saying, food related or otherwise, I will close my eyes and like imagine her. What would she do? Because your higher self is the version of you that has zero fear, only acts with pure love, knows what is absolutely best for you. So putting the ball in her court and saying, okay, but what would she do, is a really good way to kind of like double check your intuition. And as you practice, you will realize that your intuitive voice is quite distinct from the normal chatter in your head. So typically, your intuition speaks in more simple terms. Like, it's just, it is what it is, period. And then the fear is like, oh, but what if that? Oh, but what if that? Caveat, nuance. And your intuition is just like, boom. And your intuition is also oftentimes like neutral. So your intuition can say, don't do that, or yes to that, but it's pretty like finite about it. Whereas again, like the fear is like very chatty, anxious, fear-based. Your intuition's just like, it is what it is. So those are some ways that you can distinguish. And as you practice and then follow the intuitive nudge, and then like it works or you feel good, it's aligned. Okay, got it. Like, that's how it sounded. That's how it felt. I followed through. It was aligned. Great. Like, let me add that data and let me practice again and again.
That's phenomenal. I love that as well. Because so many times, even in the space that I work in, people come to me, but yeah, but I don't know. I don't know. There's like this voice, and there's this voice. But that's really clear cut in the terms of, actually giving yourself time and space to sit with that divine version of yourself and learning what she wants and what she feels. And, sometimes it also pops up physically, like people can get pain, or as we mentioned, like the gut and mind connection. Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah. So when it comes to our bodies and our brains, our body will lead sometimes the brain, and the brain will lead the body, right? So let's say that you're having a great time, you're out with your friends, but then all of a sudden you start kind of feeling like a stomach ache, maybe, or you start feeling a cramp. Because of that pain in your body, now mentally, maybe you start freaking out. Oh my God, wait, what's happening? Right? So because of the body sensation, the brain is now going on that path. Sometimes it's the opposite, right? Like you're feeling good, you're feeling fine, but then you start getting anxious. Like this happens to me. I'm scared of food poisoning. So sometimes I'll get in my head like, oh my God, wait, but is that cooked all the way through? Oh my God, like where was that source? Is that okay? And then I start feeling nauseous,
Mm.
right? It wasn't actually like a food input or a body input, it was my brain. So it goes both ways, which is really helpful to know so that, I talk a lot about nervous system regulation because oftentimes we'll use food as a tool to cope instead of actually coping internally. And so knowing if it's your body leading the way or if it's your brain leading the way can help when it comes to regulating. Oftentimes when people say, oh my God, I have anxiety, like I'll repeat these affirmations, but sometimes your brain is way too preoccupied and your body can receive direction better. So what happens if you lean back or if you lie down or if you put your feet up against the wall and put your body into a relaxed position, your brain will often follow and the anxiety will go down. So being in tune with both your body as well as your intuition and your brain, like those are the three pieces that we work with, can really create this synergistic ecosystem so that you're receiving data and input from all those different sources. That's how eating with love and intuition works when it comes to making food decisions. It's not just what you're craving. It's not just your third eye intuition. It's not just your body. And it's definitely not just your brain. It gets to be all three all together.
It's amazing. I love that. And I mean, looking at food as something that people can turn to in order to cope, why is that the case? Why, people obviously have different coping mechanisms, but why do you feel that people turn to food in order to cope from, say, like disturbances that interrupt those three whole self practices?
So there's two reasons why I believe food is one of the more common tools, even more common than like alcohol. One is because when you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which is something that we look at in psychology, we'll see the bottom is like what you need to survive first and foremost. And it's food, water, shelter, and like clothing. Okay. You need those things before you can move to the next tier, which is like relationships and connection. And then you need those before you can move to the next tier. Or I think before that is like money and then relationships and connections, right? So food equals safety on a physiological, biological, mental level. Because back in the caveman days, like if you did not have food, you could die.
Mm.
So when you did have food, you were safe. So if you're having some sort of like disturbance, right, whether it's mentally, physically, spiritually, food equals safety. Your body, your DNA knows that. So you may unconsciously go for the food for that reason. The second reason I believe is because food is something that we interact with 3 times a day, every day. It's just so readily available. I heard this from so many women, especially during the pandemic. They said, well, everything else in my life felt so out of control. Food was the one thing that I could control. And it's something you can control multiple times a day, every day for the rest of your life. So it's just like, it's almost too easy. It's like right there as
Mm.
something to use.
Mm. Well, that's so sad that, and we looked at the numbers during the pandemic and how much, say, disordered eating disorders increased during that period. It normally, unfortunately, does come down to control and then morphs into that obsession and that need because you're getting that validation and you're getting that proof and that high almost from feeling in control of something in your life. But with that, how does somebody know the difference between, say, pursuing unhealthy behaviors and healthy behaviors? Because we live in a society that very much influences us to be healthy, to look a certain way, to exercise regularly. Like these are necessities in our everyday life to move our body and to eat. How do you know when it's actually unhealthy?
Great question. So I, again, look at soul health, mental health, and physical health. And I believe that pretty much everything we do, not 100%, but pretty much everything that we do with food and exercise and health related things are going to either support all of those or support two out of three and are going to be neutral for the others. So, for example, eating dessert, I think we can all agree, is not necessarily like a green thumbs up for our physical health. Okay. It's okay. Sugar is not the most nutrient dense. We can say that. Okay. It's just a fact. Now, if you're eating an amount of dessert that's making you feel sick, now we've got like a thumbs down in the health department for physical health, even if it was like, oh, but my soul wanted it and my brain wanted it, right? Whereas if you can say yes to the dessert for your soul health and yes to the dessert for your mental health because it's fun and it's happy, and then physical is like neutral, right? Like it's an amount that feels good. You don't feel sick. It's not really harming you physically. It's just kind of meh, then we're good. Right. So I think about those three categories. Let's say that when I was struggling with food, it was all of like the obsession, right? So I would eat foods like I was going to make an Instagram post about this. It's not the zoodles fault. It's not the cauliflower rice's fault. It's not about the food, right? You can eat zoodles and that can be totally loving and healthful for all three of those categories. But for me, it was sure giving me more vitamins and minerals and fiber physically, but my soul was suffering and my mental
Mm,
health was suffering, right? So we've
mm,
got one thumbs up, but two thumbs down,
mm,
right? Whereas I've made zucchini noodles since then. And it was like, ooh, this is fun. This is just interesting. This is unique. I want some more vegetables. I still have carbs and I have protein. Like we're all good, right? So I would say, is it coming from love or is it coming from fear? And then thinking not just about your physical health, but your mental health and your soul health. Are those being hurt in the process? Are your relationships being hurt in the process? Are you missing out on life? Because then at that point, it's not healthy anymore. We have to rewrite our definition of health and make it a lot more holistic. And then you'll be able to see, okay, like, is it worth it? And for me, I believe it's never worth it to put one on a pedestal beyond the other. And I'll say the same for like soul health being put on a pedestal and physical health being let go. That's not what we want either. Right.
mm,
So that's why I love to still talk about physical health, nutritional science. A lot of people are scared that intuitive eating means they have to give up on their health goals, like physical health goals. And that is totally not my goal at all. I
mm,
think that there's some more extreme intuitive eating language out there that's like very anti-physical health and that's not my style. So those are the two ways that I look at it and question, is it love-based or fear-based? Like where is the motivation coming from? And how are we feeling physical, mental, and soul health wise?
mm. Because we do look at, when you come to a certain environment where you're eating certain foods and there might be a lot of stress around, as you say, eating those foods that might be less nutrient based. How does someone know that, like, can really tap into what is actually, because we did mention earlier today that, sometimes you can have your head noise that pops in that then makes you feel sick, and then you'll convince yourself that you're sick. How can you tap in and go, well, no, like I'm kind of just fueling this into my head, telling myself that this is going to make me sick, or that I'm gluten free, or that I'm intolerant. How do you
Yeah.
side the head noise?
Yeah. Okay. So I always go to the subconscious mind first. Like, if you are convincing yourself that you're intolerant or that you can't eat that, or like there's this guilt or this obsession, it's never about the food. It's always about something deeper. There are 8 subconscious roots that I work with. So typically with obsession, it's control, right? And if it's saying, oh, I can't eat that, I can't eat that, I can't eat that, you're putting these restrictions on yourself for this sense of control. And it's so interesting because you may see this too in your work. Like people are more scared of freedom than they are of being in chains. Most people really would rather be in chains and restricted than have freedom, because the idea that like you are truly free and can do whatever the heck you want and be the own leader of your life is scary to people, because that means there's unknown. But if you have rules and restrictions, then it feels like, okay, well, I know what I can eat, I know what I can't. And it gives you this false sense of control. So I would say let's rewire and reprogram your relationship with control first, like baseline. You're going to feel so much more under control, peaceful, stable in life in general and with food. And also just really starting to question, like, is this love-based or fear-based? Coming from love, or is this coming from fear? Is this giving me love or giving me fear? Is another good way to start to parse through, okay, like what is my truth and what actually isn't.
Mm. We talk a lot about binge eating disorder and the impacts that can have mentally on someone as well. But when we talk about the physical effects, I feel like that never really gets much of a conversation of what are actually the short-term and long-term effects of someone that if they were to pursue binge eating behaviors.
So, what I see, and I think it will depend person to person, is like right after you binge, which basically means like you've eaten a very large quantity of food. Typically, there's some sort of physical discomfort, right? Feeling nauseous, stomach ache, feeling like pain and tension because your stomach is literally stretched. And over time, we can see gaining weight if you're eating past what you really need. I think that like talking about weight and calories, people like shy away from, which I understand. Part of it though is just the facts, right? Like if you eat way more than you need, your body has to hold on to that somehow. So weight gain might happen. Right. So I think it's overall like a feeling of discomfort though, and not feeling good, right? If you're eating way past fullness, like that's going to not feel good on your digestive system either. But it's all totally reversible and totally healable, no matter how long you've been binge eating or how often. Like I've never met someone that couldn't be healed.
Mm. Can you go in and out of it? Can you go through stages where you've been through binge eating and then, say, pursued recovery and then you fall back into it?
Yeah. Yeah. And when that happens, what I see typically is that the recovery that took place wasn't deep enough. And the subconscious root origin that led to the binging in the first place was not addressed, because people want to just get the tips, the tricks to stop binging. And they're just focusing on the tips, the tricks, the food. And it's really never about the food. And most people don't know that.
Mm,
So they try to just portion control or eat mindfully, which is fine, great, but that's not why you start binging in the first place. So if you're not actually doing the subconscious reprogramming, the inner child healing, the safety work to heal, the abandonment wound and the fear of being seen wound, then it is quite common for it to come back.
mm. Can you explain to someone that, say, wouldn't understand what a binge episode would be? So a lot of the time we talk about binge eating disorder as a whole or something that people go through during a period of time, but when there are actual episodes, can you explain that was not aware of what that is or what that would look like? What would come up for that person and how would that take place?
Yeah. So, I get this question often. People want to know, how do I know if it was a binge or if I just overate? And to me, what matters more is like how you feel, whether you overate a little bit and now you feel kind of sick, or you binged and you ate a quantity that would never be, quote, normal for a human, doesn't really matter to me. What matters is that you get the support that you need, right? So typically, though, overeating would be like, okay, I ate like a few more cookies than I really wanted, and now I kind of feel stuffed. Or I finished that plate of pasta when I really didn't need to. I could have eaten 2/3 of it, and now I feel stuffed. Or I had a second portion, a second helping when like, because it just tasted so good. Binging typically is like I ate the entire pint of ice cream in one sitting, or I ate the entire bag or the entire tray. It's like an amount that would never really be, quote, normal for someone. That's how I see it. And again, I don't think that the technical definition matters so much as how you feel, right? Because I have tons of clients who would say, oh, I binged, and like they really just felt out of control. Even if it wasn't an entire container of XYZ food, it was like I felt out of control. I felt like the food was controlling me. I felt like I couldn't stop. Those feelings are typically what we associate with a binge. So I never would ask my client, oh, like how much exactly was it? Because I don't care. What I care about is like, well, what was happening before? How did it feel? What drove you to that? How can we move on from it?
Mm. And then even when that guilt and that shame steps in afterwards, how does someone overcome that? Because that can be a very overpowering feeling, and you have to sit through it. Like, how else are you supposed to deal with those feelings that come up afterwards?
Yeah. So first, like get support, right? So that you have someone to help you process it and cope with it. But my goal for my clients, if they do binge, is to come to a state of neutrality as soon as they can. Not to sweep things under the rug, but just to see things objectively. I binged. I ate more than I needed. I felt out of control. Period. Right? Not, oh my God, I can't believe I did that. I'm the worst ever. This is so awful. Right? Challenging for sure, for sure. But the goal is to come to a state of neutrality, because then you can move on and say, okay, I overate or I binged. I did not feel good. I do not feel good. Okay. What do I want to do about that? First, to feel better physically. Do I want to make some herbal tea? Do I want to go for a light walk? Do I want to lie down? Do I want to do some stretches? Like, what do I want to do so that I physically feel better sooner? And then we can also go into observation mode. Like, okay, why did that happen? Like, what do I actually need? Because I did not need the food. What is it that I was actually desiring and needing that led me to that urge? Because I think that when we understand where these behaviors come from, it's easier to release that shame and guilt, because you realize it's so not your fault. It's the wounding, it's the trauma, it's the triggers. And I always say, like, the fact that you're struggling with food is not your fault, but it is now your responsibility. So moving into that, I say, like, move out of victim mode and into hero mode. Like, okay, this is what happened. I'm feeling some emotions. Obviously, that's very valid. So what do I want to do about it? You're going to get very far with that mindset.
Mm, incredible. And looking at how we can do things about that, we then step into
Yeah.
the principles known as intuitive eating,
Yeah.
which I believe is probably been around for a long time, but is only sort of gathering some hype in the last couple of years. Um,
Yeah.
why do you think it works? How does it work? What are the principles? And why is it something that we all really should be pursuing, not just people that are falling into that illness sort of state?
Yeah. So, interestingly enough, I do not teach the 10 principles of intuitive eating because, as I mentioned, when I was healing my relationship with food, this is actually a really funny story. So, I what basically was like, how do I become a professional in the nutrition field? I'm healing my relationship with food. I learned the science, but I also really was activated by the spirituality. And so, yeah, the intuitive eating book and method was created by two dietitians. And I'm not sure where the first one lives, but the second one lives in Los Angeles, and that's where I'm from. And so, while I was like, this is summer in university, I was home in Los Angeles and I wanted to see if I could shadow some dietitians. And the only one who responded and said yes was Evelyn, who is one of the co authors. I did not know this. So basically, it was a meetup of all of these like anti-diet, intuitive eating dietitians. They meet once a month to like support each other, bring, cases to the group if they're having trouble with a client, and just like be in community. So I arrive and I had no idea that that's what this was. And they're like, "Oh, have you read the book? Do you have the workbook?" I'm like, "Oh, no." So they like gave me all the books. I was just, a student like reading, listening. And then I realized afterwards, as I'm learning more about intuitive eating, like, oh my gosh, that was her. So there's nothing wrong with the 10 principles of intuitive eating. For me, it just was not deep enough. And I think it's a perfect introduction. I have a lot of clients that read the book. They're like, okay, I'm understanding, but I'm still not like doing. I'm still not healed. And so that's why I created Eating with Love and Intuition. So that's my method, which basically says, let's eat out of love for our physical health, our mental health, and our soul health. And you're going to know how to do that, what to eat based on your intuition from your third eye, your soul intuition, from your body intuition, hunger, fullness, pain, energy, and from your mental intuition or logic. This is where nutritional science comes in. So, as I mentioned in the beginning, you're right. Like, I want everyone to be doing this no matter what, because this is not just about having a quote normal relationship with food. This is about having a really in touch, really nuanced relationship with food. And not everybody wants that. But when you do this, like, I have a better relationship with food now than, let's say, my brother, who has never struggled. He, eats intuitively generally, but I eat with love and intuition, right? Because it's very intentional. I'm very tapped in, tuned in, because I had to. I had to go that deep. So when we do it this deep, you're going to feel like you're really optimizing not only your physical health, but also your mental health, also your soul health. You have all these inputs, not just from the science, but not excluding the science, right? Like that still gets to be a part of it too. But you're also so much more in touch with your body and its cues, as well as your intuition and its cues.
And you have days where it doesn't work.
No. No. I mean, there are days where maybe like you're feeling triggered and maybe it's like more challenging to listen. But no, it always works. It's always available. Like your intuition is always available. Sometimes we just have to do a little bit of digging, right? Sometimes there's some muck over it. So I always say it's more about unlearning and doing some excavating really than it is about learning new stuff. Like this is that we were all born eating intuitively. It's not like a whole ton more that you have to learn. It's more about unlearning and then relearning.
It's phenomenal. And I find, as we've mentioned throughout this whole podcast, is how phenomenal the body is and how we become so disconnected from it that we don't know what we want, or not just food, but just in life. And really, as you mentioned, it's just about tapping into that and giving yourself that time and space to really relearn everything that you loved and that you want to pursue as a kid and now as an adult. And it's so fascinating. I love the work and I love what you're doing. So thank you so much for sharing. I wanted to end on just some different scenarios and what advice or support you would give for someone that may be in that situation. Um,
Perfect.
so, firstly, for someone that may have witnessed someone that has just gone through a binge or that may be pursuing purging behaviors, what can they say to that person in that moment? Because, as we know, there would be a lot of shame and guilt for that person. How can they support that person?
Hmm. The first thing that's coming through for me is more of an energetic choice, which is to really like open your heart to just being there with that person because they might not want to talk, but we can feel when someone is really just open and can just be there with us versus someone that's like more like leaning in, like, let me help you and let me fix this, or someone that's closed off and cold. So the first thing I would say is like, imagine your heart is literally opening, softening, and you're setting the intention to just be there with that person for whatever they might need. And I think actually the question I would ask is like, what do you really need right now? Like, what do you need? Because oftentimes we binge or we purge or we restrict to try to fill a need, but those are not actually the fulfilling actions, right? It's like I need comfort, so I eat, or I need control, so I restrict, or I need relief, so I purge. But we know that that's not, right, what we actually really need. So that's a question that I would want to be asked. Like, what do you need right now?
Mm, awesome. What about as someone that may be in that sort of environment where they're starting to obsess or they think that they're obsessing, they're eating really clean, they're probably hitting a lot of the symptoms of that orthorexia that we spoke
Yeah.
about, but it's hidden in the face of the world that we know today where it's just eat clean and look after yourself and be healthy. What should that person do if they're starting to realize that they may actually be developing symptoms of disordered eating?
Yeah. So again, I would come back to that simple question of, is this stemming from love or fear? Because oftentimes there might be this fear coming up of like, oh, I'm starting to get scared of gaining weight, or I'm starting to get scared of being unhealthy, or I'm scared of losing control. When you can identify that, then you can do the healing. Okay, like let me look at my relationship with control. If I'm scared of gaining weight, what do I think will happen if I gain weight? Well, people are going to judge me. People aren't going to love me. Okay, let's look at your relationship with self-love, right? Or we already mentioned control. Yeah, so I would ask yourself that question, like, hold up here. Where is this actually coming from? Because these urges, these tendencies don't just come out of thin air, right? So if you can ask yourself, okay, is this really loving? Is this fear-based? If it's fear, what am I scared of? That's then going to point you in the direction of where you need to actually heal, which is typically like 5 layers deeper than the food.
And lastly, for someone that is experiencing an eating disorder of some form and is has the mindset that they want to get better, but they don't know how, they don't know where to look, they don't know where to start, what message or advice would you give to them?
Well, first of all, the fact that you desire the healing makes me just so, so proud of you and so excited for you because it is 1000% possible. Like, I know that to be true. I think that there are a lot of good resources out there. There's a lot of not as good resources out there. So depending on where you live, how old you are, like what you have access to, I would say, there's some traditional recovery options that sometimes work, sometimes don't. Really depends on what you're looking for, like which type of disordered eating you're experiencing. I think that there are some really good support systems on social media. Like people will message me and say, hey, like this is what's going on. Like, can you refer me? Or, which program of yours should I be in? Or should I work with someone else? And like, if it is not my scope, like I will always refer out and say, this is what I think you should look for. So you can always message me. Like, I'm so happy to kind of field those questions. You could go to, like, if you were like, I really have zero idea, like where to even look. You could always go to like your primary care doctor and see if they have any referrals if you want to go more of that like traditional medical route. But also, if you search intuitive eating or food freedom on social media and you kind of parse through and find some reputable sources, then, I always have like free resources, really good places just to start and dip your toe in the water before you actually join like a program or a healing container.
Mm, awesome. And I couldn't agree more. There's always resources and information out there. You just have to start digging and go to the right people that will offer that support for you. Lastly, what is your one, I know it's always hard to narrow it down to one, but your one takeaway or life lesson that
Mhm.
you have learned and you like to share with people based on your own journey, based on the work that you are doing, that one thing that you just find that has stuck with you this whole time that you like to share?
I feel like this is perfect for what we've continued to talk about, which is choosing love over fear.
Mm.
That is something that I learned during that spiritual awakening that has always stuck with me. It's so, so simple. It can be applied to every moment in life. Like, am I choosing love or am I choosing fear? And Gabby Bernstein is one of my favorite resources for spirituality. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so she has this mantra, which is I recognize that I've chosen fear, I choose again, and I choose love. I think it's just perfect.
Oh, it's something that we need more of in, as you said, every aspect of our life, of just acting out of love instead of fear. And as you said, recognizing that fear is there and that it's probably not going to go away, but you
Yeah,
walk alongside it and you learn to be stronger than it.
absolutely.
Amazing. Thank you so much for joining us today on the podcast. Where can people find you if they want to reach out and connect?
Yeah, thank you for having me. This was such a good conversation. I'm just like so happy right now. So I hang out mostly on Instagram, which is Sloane Elizabeth, my name. And I also have my TikTok, my website, all the things, but Instagram is a really good place to connect. And, as I mentioned, there's always some free resources as well as a ton of different coaching programs, depending on what it is that you need.
Incredible. Thank you so much. And also congratulations on your own journey to make it where you are today and overcome your own recovery and now be able to help other people. I'm sure on behalf of our community and as well as your own that I know that you'd be touching. Just thank you for all the work that you were doing in this space.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
No worries. And thank you as well to everyone else out there for watching and tuning in for another Secret Sunday session. We've had an amazing chat with Sloane Elizabeth, and as we mentioned, you can check her out on all her platforms and jump on as well to any of the programs that may support you. We will catch you all very soon for another session, but go and have yourself a fabulous day.